I've got a little preamble because, I'm a teacher here, so we have to talk. And I recognize that questions end in question marks, so I'll get there eventually. You were here, I was trying to figure it out. It was like 7 years ago, 7 years ago at this point.
Yeah, it feels that way.
Last time you were here, your talk caused several psychology students that were in their senior year to want to change their major. So
I'm trying to remember what I talked about.
We're hoping for the same, but they were
No
all
pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. I think what's interesting about having you back, especially since you have spoken to students in particular last time, is this idea that I think your practice is so disarming. And we sort of chatted about that before, but when I've seen work documenting your practice and sort of your portfolio, as you can now see, I think there's a really interesting flavor to how you work that people feel like is this like behind the scenes, behind the curtain. And it feels very refreshing. And I guess the question that I'm getting to is, does it feel like that to you? Or is that our perception of your work?
Ask the core of that question again.
Sure. Do you feel like your day-to-day practice mirrors this perception that a lot of us have of this, like, a lot of it is, aesthetically inviting, open, despite the seriousness of it? Do you feel like that is reflected in how you feel like you work?
Yes.
Okay.
I think so. I don't know if my wife or my employees would say that about me all the time, but I think that my work reflects the reality of my life. And how can it not, right? I think it was Kyle who said something this morning. I can't remember exactly what he said. Something I took notes. Like all of our work is a self-portrait, and I definitely feel that, I try to get up every day and integrate as much of my life into my work as possible and integrate as much of my work into my life as possible. My personal aesthetic to kind of the spaces that I create for myself to work, to the kind of culture I want to build in my studio, where I have I actually have 3 people who work for me, 2 full-time, 1 half-time, to the relationships that I build with people in my life outside of work, the color that I use that really represents kind of how I feel inside, to, I think, all I've learned in a, kind of a lifetime of being a maker. So yeah, I do think, obviously I'm a human being, and I do think I also try to reflect this also on social media. I'm a human being who has bad days and gets depressed and has some anxiety, and I was diagnosed a year and a half ago by my therapist with ADHD. I'm a real human being who struggles with lots of things, just like anybody else. And I have a real desire to live my life authentically and with purpose, and I can talk more about that and how, Britt was talking a lot about how values are infused in her business, and it's something that's also really important to me. So yeah, I think so.
Okay. I took a picture of that slide from Kyle as well, because I thought that one was a good one. I think the authenticity piece is what sort of resonates the strongest, at least for me, when I see you talk and when I see your work and sort of when I hear other people talk about your work. I think it's interesting because that honesty reflects a level of openness that we don't typically see through designers, right? There's the like brand, or even artists to a degree, like there's the brand and the art that you're creating, but there's also the brand and art around the artist itself. Do you feel like that creates a level of openness and dialogue with, say, like, you mentioned social media. Do you feel like that dialogue helps to sort of self-create your practice in a way?
I think so. I learned pretty early on, or I discovered pretty early on, and I sort of came late to this career. I didn't actually start my career in earnest until I was in my mid to late 30s. And I worked in the nonprofit world before that in education. And so, I'm, coming at this, with a whole other kind of lifetime of experience. And remind me what you're asking about. Sorry, I was backtracking and then.
So the social media aspect. So
Yes.
like one thing you posted the other day, right, was what was it? It was the note to self.
Yes.
And you were like, in a way, you
Yep.
were setting boundaries.
Yes.
And like giving yourself that grace
Yes.
to set boundaries.
Yes. So I think social media for me is a reflection of the stuff I care about. And sometimes that's mental health. So that post in particular, I was actually telling a story about a time, I want to say it was like 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. And a woman had been pursuing a friendship with me, and I wasn't really sure if I was like interested in being friends with her or not, but I had to cancel on her at one point because I was super busy. And she went off the rails. Like, she was really pissed and wrote me this really mean email. And my initial reaction was like, I want to, I wanted to beat myself up because I felt really bad because I had obviously hurt her feelings. And then I also recognized that her reaction to my canceling on her was way out of proportion from, what I felt I had done. And so I made this like list of like boundaries around, like your first obligation is to take care of yourself, and that I wasn't responsible for her feelings or her reaction. And so I post this on social media. I make this like notes to self. It's got like 4 or 5 things in it. You can look at my Instagram and see it. I posted it a few days ago, and it went viral. And those moments for me are big lessons that when we are, and I think a lot of the speakers today have talked about these things, that when you are vulnerable around the things that you're struggling with in your life, people are into that. It makes other people feel seen. And so a lot of my practice has become about, storytelling around what I'm struggling with. And my work is very much a reflection of those things. And that, me talking about stuff that I struggle with and making art about those things has, I think, built my audience and allowed people to feel a connection to what I do. That has really like grown my career. And also, including things like, I do also talk a lot about politics. I was really nervous when I really started to do that in 2016, that it was going to negatively impact, the brand collaborations that I was doing and my client relationships. And if anything, it strengthened it, because I think really what people are looking for is somebody who has an opinion or a voice and isn't afraid to talk about the stuff that they care about. I mean, it's like if we think about people like stand-up comedians, the people that we find the funniest are the people who are actually the most self-deprecating. Hannah Gadsby's famous bit is like really all about that. The writers that we love the most are the ones who are telling like the stuff nobody wants to talk about. And so I've like really been working hard over the years to like balance my sense of like privacy around my life and, the stuff that feels sacred to me, and also sharing enough about myself through my work that people feel a sense of connection to what I do.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's interesting to like, within that aspect of your practice, there's that openness and that honesty it's like a breath of fresh air from the idea of like, hustle culture, right? And that post in particular, it was funny because I saw it from a colleague here who reposted it, and it was this funny like, yeah, no, it's okay to set this boundary. It's okay to take that sort of breath and like say, these are my boundaries. And I think it is so drastically different from that idea of like hustle culture that we see, especially within the like creative arts. Like, oh, if you're not making it, you're just not working hard enough in a way. And I feel like that's another component of why students want to switch from psychology to art after they see you, is this idea of like, it is okay to set a boundary. It is okay to work on the things that you find value in. How do you struggle with like finding that personal balance? And you don't need to go like, this is a specific case, but like, what is it just feeling out what feels right to you, or is it?
I think so. Like, there was a time a few years ago, well, actually more than a few years ago, like back when I started experimenting with like sharing vulnerable things through my work and in my writing. And Brene Brown has this term that she calls like a vulnerability hangover. And it's like when you've like shared too much, or you think you've shared too much, and then the next day you feel like you just can't stop thinking about it. And I'm a really sensitive person, so that happens to me a lot. And so I don't necessarily take it as a sign that I've said too much or done too much. I recognize that it's like a normal part of the human experience after you've been vulnerable to feel like maybe I've shared too much or whatever. But I feel like when I heard that for the first time, it resonated so much. And in my book, Art Inc., there's somewhere in that book I talk about sharing, and like, and that book is kind of old now. It's like over 10 years old, and a lot of it's kind of out of date, but there are some nuggets in there. And I think when I was writing about blogging, which was really popular when I wrote that book. And it actually was like my foray into sharing about myself was through my blog, which doesn't exist anymore. I took it down, but I guess Instagram is my new blog. So anyway, I wrote something like, if you feel like you shared too much, you probably have. And so, but we never know what's too much until we try, right? And then it's like either the reaction is sort of like not what we expected, or maybe how we feel. We have this vulnerability hangover that doesn't go away. So then the next time we're confronted with an opportunity to share something, we might dial it back a little bit because, we felt like maybe the last time I tried this, I said too much. And so I think it's just like this gentle dance that I do, and I know after so much time, like what feels good and what doesn't.
Do you try to incorporate that into, like, say, if we're looking at your practice from a macro level, do you try to incorporate that in sort of intertwined with these sort of wants to push in a political area or wants to push in other social issues like mental health and things like that? Are you big picturing every time you do that, or are you?
To a certain extent, and I similar to Britt, I have like brand values and personal values, and I've done a lot of work. In fact, I published a values deck where you can do this sort of values sorting exercise for yourself. It's my best-selling product, and obviously the world wants, to do work around values, but I think all the time about what is meaningful to me, and then I try to make my work, not just the actual work that I'm creating, mirror those values, but like the work I do with my staff, the culture I create, in my workplace, the kind of vibe I create in my shop, like that all of those things are reflective of the values that are important to me. And those things are on my mind all of the time. So yeah, I think so. And I actually think that once I figured out that if my work, even the stuff that, you see up here that doesn't have words on it and literally is like a scarf that's decorative that you wear around your neck, that even those things come from my values, like maybe around like spreading joy, or I have a love of color, that all of my work hangs together conceptually and visually because I like come at it from the same place. And once I figured out that part of my voice was my values and my sense of purpose in the world, like my work got better because I was always working on things that were meaningful to me. I mean, every now and again, I get a client job that I think is going to be aligned with my values and ends up being a total nightmare, because you just don't know. And,
Sure.
and oftentimes the red flags that you see aren't, eventually aren't there in the beginning.
Right.
But I try. Yeah.
So we've, in chatting recently, you mentioned that you don't work on Fridays, or you try not to work on Fridays is how you phrased it, which I think is even far more honest and open than, oh, I'm not available Friday, right? Which is what I feel like a lot of people do, is they just sort of, they pose it in that way, like it's somehow not acceptable. Can you talk about how you incorporate self-care into your practice, or how it informs your practice?
Yeah, and I think it's hard to tell that story without kind of going back a little bit and talking about how I used to operate. So I worked in the nonprofit. I was an elementary school teacher. That was my first job. And I did that for about 10 years. And then I went to work for this education nonprofit. And I'm almost 58 years old. So this is my third career. And I did each of those things for about 10 years. Well, I've done art and design for way longer, but each of those jobs for about 10 years. So the first 20 years of my career, until I was like in my late 30s, I was, making art on the side kind of as a hobby. And then I kind of decided at one point, like, I want to do this. And and it was kind of this was all happening when the internet was becoming a space for makers to share what they were doing. There was no Instagram yet, but there was like Flickr and blogs, and the DIY movement was happening, and I wanted to be part of that. And so I quit my job and decided to try to become a working artist. And I flailed a lot in the beginning. But one thing I recognized, or I thought that I recognized in the beginning, was that I had this notion that I'd come from this job where I was paid really well. I worked in a very well-funded nonprofit. And my parents, I was like in my early 40s at this point, and my parents were like totally dismayed that I was leaving this prestigious job as this project manager at a nonprofit to become an artist. Like, they could not wrap their heads around it. And so I had in the back of my mind that I needed to prove to my parents that I could make it. And immediately I sort of adopted this very capitalist notion that like time is money. And I began kind of working all of the time. I was a really hard worker in my previous job, but it was a 9-to-5 job, and I would like go have a life outside of work. And that really ended for me when I became self-employed, ironically. And, asked my wife, like, I started my business around the time that we met. And I would get up in the morning and like immediately go to my computer and work until late at night. And I was constantly networking and making stuff and putting it out there. And it's so funny to hear you describe me as anti-hustle because that's literally what I did for the first part of my career. Like I was working all of the time. And for about the first 10 years, I just, kind of burned myself out. And I made a really, I understood like way before I stopped hustling that I needed to stop hustling, but I was sort of on this hamster wheel, that you get on where I think I also had this like kind of like scarcity mindset that if I get off the hamster wheel, like all the opportunity that's coming my way will stop. The only reason I'm getting opportunity is because I'm hustling for it, like a total fear of like not working. And so anyway, I eventually like sort of like started to get off the hamster wheel. I understood that having a more balanced life, whatever that meant for me, was going to be important in order for me to not be miserable. Because at some point, like work became, this thing that I was doing because I loved it was becoming a chore. And so about 3 years ago was when I like fully jumped off the hamster wheel and started only working 4 days a week. And I wrote this post, another post that went viral. It was called Loud Quitting. And it was really about like, similar to, Britt was talking about how she's like, says yes to a lot of things and tends to overcommit. And that was me. And so I just sort of took this inventory of everything that I had been doing in my life, including working, on every project that came my way. I had a really hard time saying no. I'm definitely like a people pleaser. I'm an Enneagram 3, if anybody knows what that means. And I eventually just like realized that all of that stuff was really harming me. And so I like quit like 3 boards of directors. I'm still on 2. I stopped working 4 days a week. I started working 5, or actually I was working like 7 days a week. I only work 4 days a week now. I quit drinking. I quit a lot of relationships in my life that felt kind of one-sided. So it was sort of this like kind of like process of getting to the core of what was meaningful to me. And again, back to my values. And I started riding my bike more. I am like train 4 days a week on the bike. And I got more serious about that and having something else that I do that is like completely separate from my creative practice. I like having an interest or a passion that is outside of design has been really important. And this idea of self-care is still kind of hard for me. Like I think I should be doing even more of it. Like I still find myself in kind of unhealthy patterns sometimes around work, but I can honestly say that I made an effort to kind of like disentangle myself from work and from my notion of success, because I built a lot in 10 years, and I realized that that was fine, and I wanted to honor that, and I wanted to keep my business moving, but I wanted to move it in a mellower way. So I also like my employees also, well, they work half days on Fridays. So they're not completely on a 4-day work week, but I try to also model for them what it looks like to have a life outside of work. And, there are a lot of ways that I've really sort of changed, and it's an ever evolving process now, but I definitely am on the other side of hustle culture. And when I find myself entering back into it, I get, I have to like, check myself. Yeah, that's right.
Do you feel like your work has improved because of that? And if so, how has it changed?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've made a lot of good work for my whole career, and actually especially proud of the work I've made in the last 5 to 7 years. And a lot of that was when I was working a lot. I mean, I think that, and maybe a lot of you can relate to this, but like when you're a really creative person and you have a lot of ideas and you have a lot of energy, like it's a maelstrom of like chaos sometimes of like, I have to get this idea out. I have to make this thing. I can't just write down the idea. I have to do it. And for me, a lot of the work that you see up there is client work, but a lot of the work is, oh wait, what happened to my slideshow? It ended.
Oh, it just skipped off, I think, just a second ago.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right. Fine. Anyways, a lot of the work that you saw was, is client work, but a lot of it is personal work. And so I have to like, really kind of, I'm one of those people who has to really like get my ideas out and, make them happen. And so now I've even like, here I go again, I've lost track of your original question.
Well, now I want to ask, just to
Go
follow
for it.
that thread, is it like does it feel like a moment of catharsis? Like it's out, like you need to put it out in the world?
My work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like in that way, like when you have those moments of creativity where you just need to make it happen, and you say like,
Oh, you were asking
you don't want to
if my
write
work
it down.
is like better now. Yeah, I mean, so I think like sometimes when I'm in those periods of chaos, like some of the slides you saw were from this museum show that I had, and I had like 9 months to make, I don't know, 47 screen prints and build these sculptures, and like it was pretty intense, and I had a bunch of other work going on at the same time. It was like the most creatively fruitful time for me, and I had a lot of support from my staff, but sometimes I think the most intense creative periods that I've had have been kind of chaotic, but that's not sustainable.
Right.
And so sometimes I see myself entering into those periods, and then I have to make sure that I have some respite. So for example, a year ago, I had both my knees replaced, and within about 6 weeks of each other. And I had 3 months basically away from my studio, and I ended up developing a very mellow creative practice while I was recovering. Like I kept this sketchbook of collages, which I then like ended up painting the collages and had a solo show this summer. So like it ended up turning into something really kind of big and meta for me, but it was a period of like very mellow kind of creative, and it was some of the best work I feel like I've ever made. So for me, I think there's just different energy that goes into like the sort of chaotic creation that goes into the more mellow creation. So I can't say my work is better. It's just often different now because I can really take the time to kind of think things through. So.
Sure. Okay. Just to follow up on our question from the conference, where do you see design headed? And I have a follow-up sub-question once we land there.
I mean, I don't think you can talk about the future of design without talking about AI, so I will briefly touch on that. I do think that, I mean, I won't lie and say that I am so grateful that I got to have a career that was, like that I've been able to thrive as an illustrator at a time when I wasn't competing with AI. I am sort of towards the end of my commercial career. I'll always make art, but I'll probably retire in the next 4 to 6 years. And I am so grateful every day that I got to do what I do. That said, I do think that AI has, I mean, we all know it's here, it's a reality. I do think that, for ideation, it can be really useful. I personally do not use it at all. I have no interest in it at all. I don't really know how to use it. One of my students actually tried to help me use Adobe's like design AI once, and it was so bad that I never tried it again. But I personally think that, and I think that like we've seen this in the history of design, like we go through a phase that then is like people react to it, and and right now like our culture is so screen based and like everything is digital. And I think over the next 10 years, and I see this happening already, that we're going to, like, people are already rebelling against AI, and especially like that there's no sort of transparency around it. And so I think there was some story that my wife was telling me about the other day about how there was some reggae band that was an AI band, and like people on Spotify like recognized it as such and actually got really pissed because there was no transparency around that, and it started to go viral. And I do think that like transparency around AI is super important, but I also think that people crave like the human touch and the human hand, and that we're going to see more and more, not just because of AI, but because we are so digitally focused, like a return to craft and to things that are made by hands. I think also like we're going to see probably a lot more infusion of things like sound and smell and other senses in design, things that AI can't create. Texture is super important to people, and like just feeling things. Charlie had a slide up earlier that was like, think about a time, or maybe he said, I can't remember, I wrote it down, something about like, think about a design, like let's think about design as how something, not how something looks, but how it makes you feel. And that's something that only human beings can do. And so I think, we're going to see probably a lot more like human touch, emphasis on the human hand, on human connection. And there is going to be like a movement toward that probably sooner than later. 10 years is a really long time from now. So.
Well, it's also funny too, because even when you brought it up, right? Like or just a second ago, you mentioned you might retire, but also that you'd continue to make art. And it's, there's also the aspect of just making is fun, right?
Yeah.
It's just the creative act in and of itself.
I fantasize about that all the time. I mean, like, I love having a creative business, but, at the end of the day, I'm selling shit, So, and I'm making shit to sell. Or I'm like hoping that I get a job where some company pays me money to make shit for them.
Right.
And there's a certain amount of like pressure and like transactional stuff that happens there that I make stuff that I hope brings people joy or a sense of hope, or makes people feel like they belong. Those are all really important things to me. But at the end of the day, I'm selling stuff.
Right.
And I'm employing people to help me do that. And there's pressure to make sure they get paid, and that they get paid well, and that they have health insurance. And like owning a business is so multifaceted in that way. And so I like think all of the time about like, what if I got to wake up in the morning and just like ride my bike and then make whatever I wanted for no reason at all.
Right.
And there's something about that that's really beautiful. And it's, being a working artist is amazing. And there are many ways to be a working artist. And I have chosen one that is, where I sell what I make, sustain my living and sustain the livelihoods of the people who work for me. But it's, it does feel like a lot of pressure sometimes. Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to ask my follow-up because
You don't?
Well, it was more so along the lines of like, we're looking forward to the next 10 years, right? Because this is the 10th year of this conference. And I think it's really important to look forward, But there's also an aspect that's important to look back to see where we are now. And I'm wondering, how, and this doesn't need to be a positive or a negative necessarily, but how do you think design got us to where we are now? And is that an optimistic or a pessimistic view?
Wait, how do we?
So like the question is where do you see design taking us in the next 10 years? But how do you see, like over the last 10 years, how do you see where design has gotten us to where we are now?
You didn't tell me this question before.
I know, sorry.
That's okay.
I thought about it on a bike ride earlier.
Oh, those bike rides.
I know.
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, I think what's interesting now is that, and this is sort of related to like where we're headed, is that we're entering this phase where like anyone can be a designer, right? Anybody can put Canva on their phone and make something. And I do think like what's starting to happen is everything looks the same. And so things that look different or feel different or have a different vibe are actually like what people are drawn to. So in many ways, that's good for those of us who are human beings who want to make stuff, right? Like our stuff stands out. And I'm hoping that companies still want to work with us and that, people still hire us to do stuff for them. And I think like a lot of that has like there's like this design democracy now. It used to be this thing, like even when I first started, which wasn't even that long ago, like not even 20 years ago, where I felt like I was an imposter. I never went to art school. I never went to design school. I was self-taught. And so I thought like, do I even belong here? Can I even do this? Because I don't like, can I even call myself an artist or a designer? To now, like, I'm like a leading person in my industry, right? And like, that's an amazing thing, right? That like, because of the internet, the world of art and design has been opened up to so many people who would never have even known it existed. Like a lot of designers will talk about like skate culture and how skate culture like helped them figure out that design was a thing because like art and design in street art is really important in skate culture. So like a lot of guys like Cody Hudson and others who are like my age, like came into design through skateboarding or snowboarding, like, and they tell these stories about like their introduction to design. And now like most high school students know that graphic design, maybe even illustration is like a career path. And that's because more people do it now. More people do it and didn't go to school for it. And so I feel like that's the movement we've won. I mean, there's probably many other things to say, but I feel like that's one movement of the last 10 years is like, and I was definitely part of that, is like the self-made designer or the person who didn't go to art school or who learned just by being on the internet or practicing and putting things out there. Like, I think that was way less common before. And now we're seeing the pendulum swing where like all these tools exist to help you be a designer. And I don't mean Photoshop and Illustrator, like you still got to have skills to use those things, but like these apps and platforms that like help you figure out how to make something look good. And like it's sort of like the dumbing down of design. And so now I think we're probably going to see a backlash against that, which is maybe what I was talking about earlier. So that's what I think.
I think that self-doubt that you mentioned is what resonates really well. Just to circle back to the initial, I think that more than anything, because I think a lot of people feel that more than they're willing to admit. And I think like just from the perspective of being in the classroom and seeing students, a lot of times the word artist is never mentioned or the word designer is never mentioned. They are studying those fields, but they are not willing to call themselves that title. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really interesting because they're investing so much to be a part of that world.
Yeah, I think like for me, and I didn't study art or design in school. For me, I like remember thinking, I struggled calling myself that for a really long time. I used to give this one talk that was all about like basically my own imposter syndrome. And like the first time I ever went to a conference like this, when I was first starting out, like that I was like, I had drawn myself as a cat character, and in all of the slides, and I was like, in one of them, I'm like in the corner of some design conference, like going like this, like, oh, they're all looking at me saying, why is she here? She's not really an artist or whatever. The joke was on me because like what I realize now is nobody cared that I was there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're not there.
Yeah.
We always think that people are thinking things about us, and really, it's not happening. And I realized also as I got to know people that everybody sort of feels that way, even people who do kind of go to prestigious schools and study in prestigious programs and get accolades at a young age, that everybody feels like they don't know what they're doing,
Right.
and they're just trying to figure it out. And at some point I just kind of decided to own, the experience that I had, and understand also that because I came at it from a very different place than a lot of people and at an older age, that I actually had some things to offer that other people didn't. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
We have time for a few questions from you all. Yeah.
Your art style is so like recognizable as your own, and obviously that's like a really big asset for client work. But do you ever feel an obligation to repeat your old work in client work because of that?
I don't. So the question is, in case you didn't hear, like that my art style is so recognizable, do I ever feel an obligation to repeat that in client work? I think client work is often an opportunity to break out of your personal style. And I try to think of it that way. Like, obviously, I design for everybody from my cycling coach. I did her branding to like, huge companies. And, in every instance, you're going to see symbols and icons that are like, or a drawing style that's mine. And, that's because I've been doing this for 20 years, and, I draw every day, and I've sort of come into my own place. But I actually think some of my best work has happened when I've done client jobs that have really pushed me outside of my comfort zone, and then, pushed me in a new direction, like whether it's like a totally new color palette, or having to draw things that I wouldn't normally draw, but like in my style. So I always try to at least look at those situations as opportunities to actually push myself out of my own kind of way of doing things. So, every now and again I get a client job where they basically show me what they want me to do, and it's like something that I've done a million times, and you're like, okay, fine. But really good clients will actually like challenge you to make something that is really unique for them, and I hope that I can do that. More questions?
Anybody else?
I think, like you were saying, that way, especially as like women in the field. I think we're taught a lot of the time to be humble a lot. Where did you find that confidence to trust yourself in your art, and that motivation, and to put yourself out there, and to believe that your work is really good, and to kind of objectify that subjective position?
I have the word humility tattooed on my wrist, so that's this drive to be humble. I think is something that was really ingrained in me, like growing up. So I can totally relate to that. I had an actual experience where I literally had a moment. This doesn't happen. Like people always ask you, like, when was the moment this happened for you? I actually had a moment. I remember where I was. I used to be so afraid of like the attention that I was getting. So the trajectory of my career was sort of interesting. I went from while I was building my art practice and my voice, I was also on social media. So this was all happening in public view. And then at a certain point, my following started to grow on Instagram. And it's really leveled off, but it was like steady growth for many years and pretty exponential growth in the last 10. And I had so much anxiety about like being caught as not being like, it seems so silly to think about now, but I literally like had so much anxiety about somebody being like, she's not a real artist, or like, and I don't know why I thought that, but I didn't think of my experience or my path as being valid. I was comparing myself to people who went to RISD or, Pratt and like got their illustration degree. And I started getting invited to speak at conferences and things. And I just had a lot of fear around it. And I was studying meditation at the same time with this teacher. And so we would meditate together, and then we would talk and debrief like these feelings I was having. And he was like this one person that I felt really safe telling this to, because as much as I felt like I had imposter syndrome, I was also not talking about it publicly. So I had like imposter syndrome, which is its own form of shame, but then I was ashamed of my imposter syndrome, if that makes sense. So it was just like bad. And I was like in my 40s at the time, and like feeling really old compared to everyone else, and there was all kinds of things going on. And I remember telling Chris, he was my meditation teacher, about what was happening, and we just really were processing it, and he was really challenging me to challenge those thoughts. And so I was sitting with it for a long time, and I just remember this one day, I just got so pissed, and I was so mad, and I was like rage was coming out of me, like, why do I feel this way? Like, this is so dumb. Like, own it. Like, I was really starting to find success and make money, and like, and I was just frankly tired of feeling anxious about it all the time. And I just had this moment where I was like, I'm done. People love what I do. I figured out how to do it. I figured out how to do it pretty fast. And, people like love what I do, and I'm just gonna like lean into that. And I literally like the next day was like, I'm gonna wear a new hat in the world. And it's not like instantly I had confidence, but I literally like came to this place where I just wanted to shed that part of myself. And I have moments every now and again where I have like I gave the commencement address at Minneapolis College of Art and Design one year, and this was right around the time this happened. I think it was before I had that moment. And I just remember being like, I was wearing a cap and gown at an art school, which I had never graduated from art school. It was so surreal. And like gave this address, and like, there's never been a better time to be an artist. You have all these tools at your disposal and the internet, and I made my career on the internet and blah, blah, blah. And the whole time I just felt so scared, and I just like, I didn't want to feel that way anymore. And it's been so liberating. And then I started talking about it publicly. I like started writing blog posts about it, Instagram posts about it, like how I had felt this way. And literally hundreds and thousands of people were like, me too, me too, me too, me too, me too. And I was like, oh, this is a normal human experience. I feel that way sometimes, like I work in the bike industry a lot. And I'm not like, I'm probably a decent cyclist for a 58-year-old woman, but I'm not like an elite cyclist. And yet I run in those circles, and like I'm on bike podcasts and like get featured on bike things. And sometimes I'm like, oh man, what am I doing here? Like, and then I'm like, no, it's because of the work you make and how you show up in the world. And that's what people care about. And I just constantly have to remind myself of that. So, just like owning my experience as valid and still staying humble, obviously.
I think we have time for one more.
this is an easy one. You mentioned the humility tattoo. Have you designed your tattoos or someone else?
That's a great question. I actually never. Now I don't design tattoos for other people. If you're a close friend of mine and you want a tattoo, I'll make you a tattoo. But I actually used to get asked so much that I had a like FAQ on my website. I don't have it anymore. That was like, will you design a tattoo for me? And that was like, as a matter of policy, I do not design tattoos for other people. It just gave me so much anxiety to like design tattoos for strangers. So my policy is, if you see a piece of my art in the world and you want to get it tattooed on your body, that is completely fine. You can do it for free. You don't even have to ask my permission. And for the longest time, I didn't like my work enough to get it tattooed on my own body, and that I think this sleeve right here, which is now pretty old, so it's like fading a little bit, is like this floral pattern that I made, and it was the first thing that I ever had tattooed on my body, and I was like, oh, this is a huge moment for me because I actually like my work enough to get it tattooed forever on my own body. And now I have lots of tattoos that I designed and lots, obviously, that other people designed for me. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Marley. Thank you, Scale House.